want to even mess around with construction. This is one of my favorite tools. It's a little recorder, and I'm going to record us tonight, if that's all right. Because I always learn when I take stuff away and listen to it. So I'm Susan, and thank you for offering to sit here while I go off here. I like to do interactive, so if you have questions, that's good for me.
Susan, how do I press play?
Go to the bottom, to the screen at the bottom right.
I'm not a PowerPoint guy.
Go to the bottom right.
So this is oh, this thing here?
No, over left is a screen.
Right there, yep, there you go. There you go. Ta-da.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I
I
wouldn't have
got
been
it.
able to tell him that. Okay, so, is there
The mouse there is your,
okay, is this got a laser point to it by any chance?
you know, I don't know. Maybe. I haven't tried it, but I can be in there and play band and
It doesn't
watch
look like it, yeah.
It's like just a remote.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like it.
Okay, so, I think I can just do it using this. Okay, so, the first thing that I think what Rick was telling you, visualize. I think you were saying that. You need to use the art of visualization. You see a piece of property that you want to do something with, so you want to visualize what that completed project looks like. And don't be shy about that. You want to visualize who your clients are. I had a really piece of sage advice. I worked for other people up until 2012 while I still had my business on the side. 2012 I said, bag it, I'm gonna go solely on my own. And so I sought out some help with a coach, and she had me sit down and write out the characteristics of the ideal client. And I thought, what am I doing this for? But I did. And since then, for the last 6 years, that's primarily who I've had come to me to ask for help. It's very powerful. And if you visualize it and you keep putting it out there, things happen. Largely because you're already in that mindset and you're gonna make the decisions that you need to make to get there without having to put a lot of conscious effort into it. Does that make sense? Visualize the completed product and then visualize your team. We'll talk about that now. So, depending on the scope of work that's involved, and scope of work, language in this business is very, very important. Words have specific meanings. There's a language to it. And as you get into it and you rub shoulders with the professionals in this field, you'll pick it up. The more you take classes, if you go to the local community college and take classes in construction management, which I really recommend, you'll learn what that language is. It's very important. So depending on the scope of the work, and that's language right there, scope of the project, scope of work, something that's used a lot. There is a scope of work with a construction project that's rather specific. It's typically not a big general gobbledygook of soup. It's a very specific objective that's laid out. So depending on the scope of work, you may have to use an architect, you may not. You may have to use an engineer, you may not. But when you use all those professionals in this business, the architect is usually at the top of the food chain. because they're responsible for the project drawings, the project specifications. They're responsible for pulling everything together. And also, theoretically, they know the code requirements. The engineers are the next rung on the ladder, and they know the nuts and bolts of how to hold a building together, no matter in a variety of conditions, given seismic, wind, urban interface, like what we're dealing with now in the fire season. And then there's multiple facets of engineering. There's, of course, the structural, and they deal with making the building stand up. There's the civil, which deals with the grading and slope stabilization. There's the soils, geotechnical. All these guys got to work together in a concert. So when the structural guy puts together his plans, he's got to know what the civil engineer is telling him. He's got to read what that is. He's got to be familiar with that. Because all these guys put out reports and they put together what they think is necessary. And then they got to know what the geotechnical, when you design a foundation, you got to know what the soil is in order to decide what kind of foundation you're going to build. And then you go into the building components, the electrical, the mechanical, the plumbing. And again, in residential, you're not going to have to use engineers for that. You can usually incorporate all that information onto various floor plans and in the energy calculations. Anybody familiar with Title 24? Which is kind of, again, here's language. Title 24 is actually the entire set of the building code of regulations. But common speak, when people say Title 24, what are they referring to?
Current issues.
Energy requirements and how to keep the building envelope so that you're not losing a lot of energy. Because, you know, every 3 years the codes change, and that's based on our experience, and we want to get better and better and better. So, energy, we all know energy is a big deal now, right? So it's in the code. The owner representatives. You as the purchaser of this property will probably want to have some folks working with you that are representing your interests. It may be a quality assurance person that goes out to the job site and checks to make sure things are being done according to the specifications and the project manual and the plans. It may be the bank that's worrying about where their money's going. Now, stop me if you don't understand, if I'm going too fast or everybody with me now? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, when you speak of the bank, every time your contractor submits a pay application, and we'll look at one further on the presentation, the bank's going to want to know that what they're asking to be paid for has actually been done, and importantly has been accepted, right? The worst, yes, sir.
When you say accepted, who has to accept that?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say the owner, I want to accept it. That's what I would say. I would say the architect, the design professional needs to accept it. In other words, it's not out of compliance with what's being asked for in the project documents. Okay?
Passes code.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
What's
So
that?
The building inspector.
Well-
Would come and like the electrical or the plumbing.
Yeah, yes and no. The thing is, and I hate to say this because I was a building inspector for over 20 years, you can't always rely on them for quality assurance. They don't care about quality assurance. is the building code? Does anybody know what that is? They're minimum standards. Minimum standards. Your design professional is probably gonna wanna give you a better product than minimum standards. So they may design to a slightly higher level. But in actuality, the minimum standards of the California codes are pretty doggone good, you know? So I guess that's kind of what I mean by accepted. And like everything in life, it's not black and white. There's always gotta be flexibility, you were saying earlier. There's gotta be flexibility, there's a little give and take, but it's important to have the protocol and have the rules and stick to them. The builders, they're the construction experts. They determine here's another construction term, means and methods. They determine what that is. The last thing you want to do as an owner or a design professional is to come out and tell them how to do that work. You say, this is what I want. I don't care what tool you use to do it. You know, that's up to you. You're the expert. And as soon as the owner or somebody else interjects themselves into that process, they take on a tremendous amount of liability. So as an inspector, for example, when I was an inspector of record, I was on a project a lot. And they would want me to kind of tell them how to do it. Because sometimes they try to kind of hook me into that. I don't do that. Do not do that. It's your thing to figure out. They're the experts. And the authority having jurisdiction is the city inspector and the utility providers. Don't forget the utilities. It takes months for East Bay Mud or whatever water utility to get around to getting a new meter installed. If you're changing the size of the water service, or you have to put in sprinklers, which inevitably leads to a change in the size of the service. So those things need to be done at the get-go. Don't put it off until the end, otherwise you'll be twiddling your thumbs while you're waiting for them to do what they need to do. Any questions?